Fair warning, my next guest, Ed Sermon, is about to give us a 360 experience into what it was like as a very young child being brought into and groomed for a pedophile ring and how this affected his life. And looking back at the lessons that he has learned, how much it has shaped his decision to explore who he is as a person and really get down to the nitty-gritties, a very visceral experience and conversation of all the ways that those experiences shaped many other experiences in his life to get him to where he is today, and how all of those associations he made has brought him back to his core centre of who he is, right down to the breath work that he has found helped himself, and he now helps other people to heal from things in their past through the connection to their breath and to who they are as a person. This is a very revealing interview and a story that really needs to be shared. I thank Ted for his transparency and the way in which he has shared his journey so that other people might become aware of some of the signs of behaviours, to also hold a non-judgmental space, that when someone has a story they need to tell, to allow the space, to hold that space, and to open a dialogue by declaring that non-judgment at the start so that when a story needs to come out, it has that ability to. And therefore the person telling that story, the person who has had that experience, is able to start their healing process with support around them. This is Ed's sermon. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments when life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Edward Sermon of Interconnection Coaching and Big Love Healing. Can you imagine being swallowed up by a pedophile ring at the age of 11? It is unfortunately something that occurs far too often in every corner of the world, maybe even in your own neighbourhood. Ted was an easy target for the predatory men who ran the operation. What followed was a life full of pain and anguish through drug abuse, self-harm, and multiple suicide attempts. As an emphatic and sensitive person, I will let Ted share his journey, the lessons he has learned from his adversity and dysfunctional adolescence, and his path to healing and wellness coaching, as well as his expanding consciousness through holotropic breathwork. I am so interested in hearing more. Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Ted.
Thank you, Vera.
It's lovely to have you here. So we start with all the big questions here first, such as what's the most influential book that you've read?
Oh, that's a really good question, and it's made my eyes search. I think probably Be Here Now, a Ram Dass book, and The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, have probably been big shifts. The Bhagavad Gita was a very big book for me. Probably read that 2 or 3 times. I've just read some fantastic William Whitecloud books on creating your destiny, The Magician's Way, and The Last Shaman. But I think probably Be Here Now.
Okay.
To an oldie but a goldie.
And what did you like most about that book?
What I really liked most about Be Here Now was that the whole message of the book was that love conquers all. The power of love is and offers light and hope. And if we can surrender into that big sense of love and let go of the smallness of ourselves, there's immense freedom in that.
There is immense freedom in that. And yet so many people find that so hard to do.
Yes.
I'd be very, very interested in reading that book. It's going to add to my ever-growing book list as I do this podcast.
Well, that's one thing what I try, and, you know, my triumph from my trauma is, you know, through everything that has happened to me in my life, it's taken me a while and a practice, a lot of practice, but I can usually access my heart. And I think being able to drop from our minds and into our hearts gives us spaciousness and that sense of big love. And the whole message behind Be Here Now, written by Ram Dass, by the way, is accessing that heart space.
I love it. And I know as you tell your story, the listeners are going to understand why that is so important to you and really all of us.
Yes, well, I think finding that path into my heart through a whole lot of different ways, not just that book, is really why I'm here, and I love life. I love what I do. I really love connecting with people. I love nature. It really has turned my life around. Before I struggled with depression. I had a very dysfunctional life. My relationships were quite broken and dysfunctional. And since I have started to walk on this path, and I call it the path of connection, because the start for me was, you know, in the midst of my suffering, I looked to nature and thought, wow, this miracle around me, it's, you know, it's bigger than me. And I could sort of like access this sort of curious awe state, just watching ants crawl through the grass. And I really put that down to just having like a connection with them. You know, when I was a kid, very troubled, you know, sometimes I'd escape from my troubles, just laying on my tummy in the field, watching ants crawl on grass, and all my problems would go away. And through that connection.
Yeah, I love that. And I often talk to my clients about remembering what it felt like to have that wondrous mystery and excitement and curiosity about the world like a child does. They demonstrate that to us so well as a reminder. And when I do visualizations, I quite often remind people again that if you remember any time that a big flock of birds has flown over you in the sky, is there ever a time that you haven't actually stood there and gone, oh, look at that?
Yeah, that.
That's right.
Being awe. Yeah. And I think, you know, like part of the connection that I think is, you know, like is definitely having a connection with that inner child state. And even if that inner child, like my inner child, you know, suffered tremendously, that inner child, you know, emotions get caught in our system, in our brainstem, and, you know, we get triggered. And the way through that is through working with the emotion of yourself in the stage of that child when that trauma happened. And so freeing that heals the child, and using your imagination to create a re-empowered situation, and all those sorts of things, releasing the energy from our bodies, all that somatic healing stuff, it all is fantastic. Well, it worked for me. And and a lot of people don't remember that child is still in us. All those things are just here have carried forward to what we are now. And so, one of my major sense of joy in life, like you were just saying, is having the ability to feel that childlike state and awe and wonder inside of me. And I think that if I hadn't had the experience I had when I was a child, I may not have ever discovered the gift of my inner child, and that gift is accessible to me.
We're going to delve into that in a little more detail shortly, because so many of the listeners will have experienced some form of childhood trauma. And I think it's a very important message to be talking about, because so many people are unable to verbalise things that have happened, particularly when they're a child. So, Ted, how about you tell us what it was like being an 11-year-old and preyed upon by these people?
Yeah, well, when I was 11, it was sort of like a big adventure, to tell you the truth. At first, I was groomed in classic style. I was lavished with gifts and taken places, and not that it was a good thing, but I thought it was cool at the time, given cigarettes and alcohol and, really quite seduced. I was confused by what was going on, but it seemed okay. There was a few things that happened to me that definitely didn't seem okay when they happened. I can remember being terrified and very scared a lot of the time.
How do these people even approach you? Like, how, for those of the listeners that haven't known someone that has experienced this as a child, how do they get access to you in the first place? Just so that people understand how this sort of comes about. Okay,
so these guys operated, they got me through my interest in, back in the 70s, it was CB radios. I was very much interested in CB radios, and I went to a friend of mine was in a scout group, and I went to the scout group to hear this guy talk about CB radios. And this guy he wasn't a scoutmaster, but he was invited there to talk for them. He befriended me there, and my parents were beautiful people. He gained their trust and, would pick me up on weekends. And at first it all sort of seemed pretty innocent.
Yeah.
But then, he started to touch me inappropriately. And by that time I was so enjoying, going these places and getting these gifts. I wasn't going to say anything to that, to stop that happening. And I also, as things progressed, my father had heart disease, and he was fairly protective, hot-blooded man. And, always if you upset Dad, he'll drop, he could drop dead. And then, I couldn't tell my mum, because my mum would have to tell my dad everything. And I also had the belief that if I told my dad, he'd go off the Richter scale and go and kill this guy and end up in jail, and I'd lose him anyway. So that's what kept what happened to me to myself until I was well and truly in my 20s. After my father had passed, actually, I didn't disclose what had happened.
I find it a very familiar part of this situation, that as a child you take on that responsibility of protecting the people around you, particularly the adults.
Yeah, and I think I was a perfect victim for this group of people. My mother had abuse in her childhood, and so my mother and I's relationship, and I've only really realised this in later years, but it was a very enmeshed relationship. I was trained and groomed by my mum to be a people pleaser. Right. She had a lot of abandonment issues, and so, her children were going to be her favourite. Yeah, and classically she used to say to me, "Oh, you're my best friend." "I'm not, Mum, I'm your son. Yeah. And so that people pleasing that was ingrained in me since day dot was what really set me up to make it very easy for these people to take advantage of me when I was a child.
So how long did this go on for?
It went on for until I got pubic hair. It's funny, when I first started to get pubic hair, I was discarded, and I actually watched them groom the next boy while I was still around. But then, I was just discarded. I was literally how I felt, and I felt that at the time, and that was part of my trauma to heal, was that being used up and discarded, and so it was, it just, I was no more use to them. I wasn't what they wanted anymore, so bye.
Yeah, very, very telling stage. You get pubic hair, and that is a sign of growing into adulthood, and they no longer want you. And that is that mindset of a pedophile. It's all about how young the children are, and it must have been extremely difficult because you're still in that mindset of protecting those other people around you, and yet here you are, discarded like a piece of rubbish at the end.
Yes. It was very confusing for me at the time, and even trying to develop after that, it led to a lot of dysfunctional behaviour through my adolescence. My adolescence was a very rocky ride. I think I was glad. I think I was lucky actually to survive what I went through. I continued the cycle of abuse. Really, I prostituted myself through my adolescence. I did a lot of drugs. I stole my mother's anti-anxiety medication and used to ride to school with 4 or 5 Serapaks under my belt and half a bottle of Cinzano. Right. So, a lot of self-harm as well. I used to cut and scrape and classic cry out for help, or just to try. Actually, I used to hide my self-harm, so I wasn't really trying to cry out for help, but I think I was trying to make sense of the feelings that were inside of me, and I had no adult that I could, felt that I could confide in to help me make sense of what was going on. So, it was one way, that self-harm behaviour, that self-destructive behaviour was one way of trying to make sense of the feelings that were stuck in me.
If you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense that would be your go-to. And as somebody myself who has suffered sexual assaults throughout my marriage, I was an adult. However, that was my first sexual relationship with my husband. And so in a way, there was a level of innocence there as well that was broken. I understand as an adult how difficult it was to process what had happened. As a child, I don't know that is possible at that age to really fathom the tendrils that would create. At what point did you ask for help and share your story with someone?
Through my adolescence, I sort of spoke briefly about my adolescence. When I was about 17 or 18, I was quite depressed, and my mother took me along to the doctor and, off to the psychiatrist, and got admitted to a psych place for depression. And, spent a couple of weeks there and then left, and, here's a prescription, have some pills, it'll all be all right. No one asked me, what had happened to me.
Right.
Not one time, that asked about how, And I think that's a question a lot of people, when anyone's in trouble or something, people go, what's wrong with you? Well, I was a healthy kid. There was nothing wrong with me. It was what happened to me. But I was never asked that question. And I think it's a very important question to ask. So I didn't really get help then. When I was in about 25 years old, I ended up telling my mum, what had happened to me, but she was quite shocked. And I don't think she could really accept it either. Like, she could never talk and process her own childhood trauma, let alone mine. And I went through life. Lots of different jobs, quite a lot of different relationships. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s, actually, and a friend showed me a DVD or a video back then it was, of a healing centre, which is based in New South Wales here, called Heal for Life. She said, I think this place would be good for you. I looked at the video and I thought, oh, yeah, it sort of would be good. I'd been so curious about, why I was like I was. I'd gone through I'd trained as a psychiatric nurse. I'd read all these books about the human psychology but penny never really dropped.
Right.
About what was going on for me. And so I went along in my 40s, as I said. I saw this video, went to this place. It was called Maya Murray then. Can remember getting up to the front gates of this place and just thinking, oh, there's something going on here. I want to run. But I couldn't, and ended up going and doing a healing week. And that's when I learnt about, how our childhood trauma and everything they said, in the behaviours, in the way it affects our brain, all these things are just the pennies really just dropped for me. And it all started to make sense. And it took me a couple of times of going there. It wasn't probably until about my second or third healing week over the space of a 12-month period that I was really able to get in touch with the emotion I had around the time of my trauma and about the trauma, and really feel those feelings and feel okay about feeling those feelings and just let them go and express them. There's a process that they use at Heal for Life that, is getting in touch with those feelings and then, accepting that your feelings are all welcome, all okay, and then doing some release around those feelings. And the thing about our subconscious mind is that it doesn't differentiate between, our imagined experience and our real experience. So, re-empower and, then do some nurturing afterwards. The process really worked for me eventually. It took me a couple of times and, there was along the journey, someone said to me, well, just try faking it till you make it, and I actually did, I did, but eventually really landed and I was able to release those feelings and stuff like that. That was such a profound experience for me. I ended up I was invited to go there and train to help people, do what I had just done. And I thought, yes, I've got to do this. Quit another career and took off down there and lived down there for 12 months and did lots of healing weeks with lots of brave, courageous people wanting to better their lives and step up and heal. There was something that I don't want to pass by on, Vera, which is I came across a lot of the times, when you spoke about trauma as an adult and trauma as a child, I think in some ways as a child, because those the tendrils of understanding just aren't there. It's sort of like a bit hard to fathom. You've got no idea. So I think, yes, you're right in saying, it's a different experience. So many times people on their healing journey will interacting with other people on their healing journeys will compare their trauma. Will say, oh, that sounds so horrible, but trauma is trauma. Trauma is more emotion than what our system can handle.
Yeah. And
it makes no difference, the degree. Trauma is trauma. And a lot of people experience trauma, sexual abuse. What is it? 1 in 5 boys, 1 in 3 girls.
Terrifying statistics, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a really important point there, Ted, because I have come across that a lot as well with people when I tell my story. Oh, that's so much worse than I've been through. And my response is always, it's not about comparing even between your own adversity that's happened in your life. Each of those things that you've experienced are trauma in themselves, and you need to learn to deal, in whatever way is going to help help you to deal with that. It's not about saying, well, that was worse than this, or this was worse than that, or you've got it worse than I have, or I've got it worse than you. Because at different times in your life, even the same trauma can be felt very differently, because so much is also about where we're at in our lives. And people can go through all sorts of trauma that it doesn't need to be sexual assault. It doesn't need to be domestic violence. It doesn't need to be other things. It can be things like having a chronic illness that changes the way that you can interact with your life and with people. It can be financial trauma. It can be all sorts of different things. And so I really love that you've explained that so well. Trauma is trauma, and we need to find the way that works for us to help get through it.
Absolutely. Yes. And as we move, through our trauma, you're right in saying that the experience of it changes. Like I feel quite comfortable and free and open to talk about what happened to me. A few years back, before I was on my healing journey, it was a very difficult thing for me to do. So our perspective of it changes, and as we move through the journey, and I think that's one. It's a big. I had some great people support me through my healing journey, and those people had been through childhood trauma as well. Mm. And so it was, quite inspirational to look. And that's one thing I really love about what you're doing, actually. It's providing that inspiration to people that, could be in a difficult place in their life, but seeing people that have been through various kinds of difficulty, but getting through it. Yeah. And then, I was saying to somebody the other day, like we judge our emotions so much. We say, oh, yes, it's bad to feel angry, or it's great to feel good. Well, our emotions are our emotions. Yeah. It's only what we think about them that makes them good or bad.
Yeah, that's so true. Anger has its place.
Absolutely. It can be a key to survival.
Yeah, and it's how you respond to it. That's the key. So if you respond to it in self-destructive ways, as you went through in your adolescence, if you respond to it in destructive ways with other people, then you need to learn how to deal with those behaviours and how to explore that emotion of anger and have someone help you do that. And like you said, have a support system, which is so important. It doesn't mean anger's bad. And as you said, any emotion. And if I can just come back to what you were saying about the healing centre, to have a space where you feel safe to explore those emotions, that can often be a major roadblock for people doing it in the first place because of the fear of what's going to come up, and the fear that can they trust themselves? How are they going to behave in response to essentially feeling what happened again during the trauma? What would you say to someone who's thinking, perhaps I need to do this, but I just don't know if I can, I'm too scared, which is, again, an emotion and quite natural?
Yes. Yes, that's really common, like the fear of going there. Like, I don't know what will happen to me if I allow these feelings to come through me. It's huge. And, one thing I've learnt is that we never really, our subconscious, or there's something between our conscious and subconscious that's a filter, and we never really will give ourselves more than what our systems can handle. Yeah. I'd say to people that having like support, to, having someone trained or to support you through. Heal for Life is very set up for, there's anger release stations, there's better blocks, sort of like enclosures with stacks of op shop crockery that you can just throw in a safe way that you can release. It's tremendously powerful. There's I help people outside of their release emotions. There's a whole lot of creative ways you can do it that are quite safe, like, throwing big rocks into a waterway, like screwing and wringing up a cloth, or ripping up material, or punching a pillow, or
felt work is very much like that as
felt,
well.
Yeah. I think it requires, for it to be effective, rather than a cathartic just catharsis is just catharsis, and sometimes we need catharsis, but catharsis can sometimes just activate more trauma.
Yeah.
So we need to do, for this release work to be therapeutic or to be beneficial, it needs to be approached with consciousness. And, so you've got to be in touch with that feeling, know exactly where that feeling come from, what's behind that feeling. Or at least have a pretty good idea.
Yeah. And
then with consciousness, let that emotion come through. And in it, when you're first starting it, I'd definitely say get some support to help you through, find a psychologist, a therapist, someone that can help you through a healing center. Then after a while, after a while on my healing journey, if I, found stuff through having a relationship with my inner child that I needed to process, I felt confident enough to be able to, do a little, release a little thing to help my inner child, or the part of me that's still my inner child, release those trapped emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly found through the recovery groups that I was part of after the sexual assault and domestic violence side of things, there were a number of things that were important in that space. And first of all, it was that people understood because they'd gone through something similar. Our experiences are always our own. However, we can almost always find someone else who's had a similar experience to understand on a level what we might be going through. So that was one of the first things that was really important, and having that safe space with sharing with those people who understood, how you get affected by these sorts of events. The second thing was the physicality. So you're saying, you had rooms with crockery that you could pick up and smash in a safe way, and for me, it was an art therapy space. And so we worked with felt. We would knead it and we would throw it. And then the harder you threw it, the better it worked, the felt. And we actually would talk about it as we're doing it. And we'd say things, that were making us angry as we threw it and pounded it and rolled it and got very physical with the felt. And as you said, having the support around you to help you through that was immensely powerful. And it was such an experience for myself and the other women that were in the group. And it led to so much other experiences which tapped into that inner child. So most of us, when we're in preschool or primary school, and those of us who become artists right through our life, do a lot of colouring in, for example, do a lot of drawing. And the power of colouring in as an adult is immense if that is something that allows you, if you're someone that is responsive to colour or responsive to that physical action of working through things. Extremely powerful. And so like you said earlier, it's about finding what works for you. It's bringing up for me again that importance of connection and energy, that everything that we're touching as we're doing those activities has energy, and we have energy, and we're sharing that, and we're creating something from that.
Yes, definitely. The community that forms in a healing week, it's set up in a very safe. People, there's some non-negotiable safety agreements which the place says, but then all the other safety agreements for the week are based on the 10 or so people there at that week's time. So incredibly important that everybody feels safe to go through their journey. And what you say about connection and connecting with people that have been through similar experience, suddenly you find out, wow, I'm not a freak.
Yeah.
There's somebody, oh, you had that reaction too, and it's just such a powerful thing. And it's sort of, for me, I think that connecting with other people that had been through similar to what I'd been was absolutely critical and key to being able to make sense of it for myself. It's interesting about art too. You know, it's one of the ways that through the Heal for Life model is that we find out from the inner child what has happened, what it needs is through using non-dominant hand artwork. You know,
Yes.
it's such a powerful tool, and I use the non-dominant hand theory to evoke different responses for myself. Like if I am starting to feel nervous, insecure or something, you know, my right hand or my adult hand will actually hold my left hand, which I call my child hand, because I'm right-handed, so my dominant hand over my non-dominant hand. But if I want to get into that child or find out something from my inner child, maybe something's coming up, I don't know what it is, and I'll check in with my inner child. I've sort of walked the track to my inner child often enough that often I just need to put my left hand over my right hand, and that's enough for the permission for that part of me to come through. So, you know, started off doing the artwork with the non-dominant hand, and then just doing like little things I can connect with that part of myself just through a little symbolic gesture, like putting my left hand over my right hand. But yeah, I think you've really got to go through that felt sense and, you know, the connection with other people, connection to your feelings, connection to your body, your emotional feelings, to your physical feelings, and then connection to other people that have been through similar.
It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story. Yeah. I'm wondering, just hearing you talk about the non-dominant hand drawing, for example, one of the things that personally I had to let go was control over the end result. And so colouring in for me was fine. It was easy. I was really, really good at it. When it came to a blank piece of paper and creating something, I would hesitate. And that hesitation wasn't for me a fear of what would come out. It was a fear that what would come out wouldn't be good enough, if that makes sense. And it makes sense to me that doing that with your non-dominant hand automatically gives yourself that unconscious permission that it doesn't matter what the result is, because you take away that expectation of yourself.
Yes. Well, that's so true. You know it's not going to be as good as what you can do. And I think, too, it's set up in a way that, you know, there's a guided visualization beforehand, and then without words or anything, you move. So it's definitely an induced mindset of allowing what's to come up. And you still have that, you know, oh, I can't do anything with my left hand,
That limiting beliefs.
I was really able to let go into that process and just let things flow when I just started to finger paint. You know, so I wasn't having to have the dexterity to drive a pencil or a brush or anything.
Yes. Yes.
And it's amazing, you know, like when you have helped to look back at what you've done, you know, just how colour and shape can actually say things to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very powerful.
Mm.
A lot of people teach colour therapy for that reason. There are many different reactions from people with colour, and colour is interesting in itself, as we all perceive colour in our own way. It's a little bit like our own truth. It's a little bit like that filter you were talking about. We all have a certain information coming through our optical nerve, and then our brain is processing it, and apparently that doesn't happen the same with everybody. So what I call a certain shade of blue, you may see differently, and somebody else may see it slightly differently again. And so it comes back to that perception. Mm-hmm. And the same for colour therapy. I know as an artist, I am very in tune with colours and how they affect me, and often what they mean to other people. And yet I'm very careful to understand that not all colours will mean the same thing to all people, because they may have had a certain experience, and maybe they're in a room with certain coloured walls, or maybe there was a certain piece of clothing that they were asked to wear all the time when something would happen. And so they have a very strong association to those things. I am very honoured, and I think it's very empowering to hear you talk about allowing yourself at that point, finally, allowing yourself to trust enough to just fully immerse in that process and let what needed to come through be explored and work through that. It isn't an easy process.
No, it's not an easy process. It takes courage. It's certainly sometimes, you know, it's definitely fearful to go there, as we were saying before. But what I think I started to realise is that when I was, you know, so going along, for instance, my first time I was abused was in a red two-door Monaro car with a black stripe on the bonnet. You know, I can see it as plain as day, right to this day. Once upon a time, if I'd thought about that car, I probably couldn't breathe. I probably would have gone into freeze and stopped. What was going on, you know, so what was happening, I was triggered.
Right.
I was having a fight, flight, freeze response, you know, to a cue that this was dangerous. So if I am okay and then suddenly I'm not okay, and I don't know why, after a while, that becomes like a gift. It's hard for some people to understand that. But when you know how to de-trigger yourself, to de-escalate and get out of that state, which there's techniques you can do that, when you know to de-escalate yourself and then start to ask deeper parts of yourself, what's going on here? You know, what was the cue? What was the signal? What does that mean to me? They're all pointers to, you know, trauma that may have been buried in our childhood. And it's an invitation then, when you know how, to actually go through and discover, release the emotion that started the trigger in the first place, and then heal, like do some re-empowering release work and heal. And now I could sit in a two-door Monaro car, whereas before I couldn't. Just to think about that car again would have sent me into a fight, flight, freeze response.
I'm aware of how powerful that is. And I would love to explore a little bit more of what you said about the techniques that have helped you to work through that. I think a lot of the listeners would be very interested to know the sorts of things. Understanding that we're just going to have a conversation about it. This is not training, because these sorts of things you need to be trained, and you yourself offer some of that as an opportunity. But just in a general sense, what are we talking about here in terms of managing that sort of a response?
To feel the feelings, to feel what's going on, to validate your feelings. So there's a very powerful thing, we were talking about the optic nerve before. Like when we have eye contact with somebody and state our feeling, it brings some, because like if we've got eye contact with people, we've got a ground or another emotional set point.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we're triggered, we're talking a brainstem response. And what happens with our brainstem, like the way our amygdala fires, it goes down into our brainstem. Our cortex, or the higher parts of our brain, go offline. They're not so accessible. So by getting eye contact with somebody, your optic nerve is one of your biggest sources of input into your brain. So it's sort of like there's a sense of connection, a sense of grounding that happens with that. And then by accessing to name the feeling, you've had to go inside and find out what it, like I'm feeling scared. To take the scared feeling up into your Broca's area for speech, which is higher up in your brainstem. Right. So you've sort of like pulled it out of your brainstem a little bit. You've gotten to speech. Then it's very important that you say to yourself, it's okay that I feel scared. Mm-hmm. It's okay that I feel scared. Now, I don't think this sort of technique works unless you've had some or done some inner child work. Yeah. So you're really saying to your little one, I'd put my right hand over, if it was me now, I'd put my right hand over my little, okay, little mate, it's okay. I know you're scared, and it's okay for you to feel scared. So you're validating the feelings. And then it's
very
sort of
important.
Why do you feel scared? And then I would do, like, if I couldn't just access my inner child in my consciousness like I learnt to do, I would then go home and do some non-dominant hand artwork and see what my pictures said, or do some non-dominant hand drawing, you know, just try and get out of the way and just come through it and, you know, get to why I felt scared in that situation, or why I felt angry in that situation, or why I couldn't move in that situation, you know, whatever the trigger was. And then I would do something to re-empower, to take my power back in that situation. I don't know, you know, some of your listeners may be, you know, familiar with Peter Levine's work, you know, like Walking the Tiger.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a bit like the deer shaking after the thing. It's sort of like understanding why, having a sort of like a map of what happened, and then doing something in reenacting it through your imagination, through some other way, and releasing the feelings, releasing the energy around the feelings. Yeah. And then doing something extremely nurturing for your little child, like saying, wow, mate, that was incredibly brave. What do you want to do now? All right, let's go fishing. Whatever they want to do. Let's have ice cream. It's sort of, so there's a process of honouring what's going on, stating the feeling, getting out of the brainstem. And I, you know, that, what I just said, I don't think that is a standalone treatment, a standalone thing, you know, like a bit of grounding, you know, like to ground yourself, if you know how to ground yourself, like feet on the ground, go into your body, feel the feelings, you know, where in my body am I having this sensation? What color is it? What shape is it? Just sort of getting yourself back into the somatic, the sense of the body. Connecting with your breath is another tremendously powerful resource. Just watching your breath come and go without trying to control it, but just noticing. I think the eye contact and the stating the feeling is a very good way to pull yourself up out of that brainstem response as well, in a first aid crisis situation if you are triggered. But, if you find yourself getting triggered in situations that, maybe you don't know why all of a sudden, I'd be really looking for somebody to explore childhood trauma with you, because so many people have no idea what's happened.
Yeah, and there's that protective mechanism again. So, we go back to when this was happening to you and you were protecting the people that were important to you. In the same way, as you said, our nervous system, our brain creates a filter and a layer of protection, and sometimes that means that we don't consciously remember things that have happened.
Yeah. It was overwhelming at the time. And so, to protect ourselves from the overwhelm, it's just compartmentalized, put it in a box. But, our perception, our senses, and our amygdala, which is, we call, the trauma box, the danger box.
Yeah.
And that's its job. Its job is to, if you're walking along a bush track and you see a stick, but it reminds you of a snake, you'll jump backwards and you'll go, that's your amygdala firing you into a fight, flight, freeze response. And for somebody who's had trauma and something happens that reminds them of the trauma, that same firing response is going to happen and they'll react, will react to it. And it's quite a great adaptation when we can work out what it is that's fired our amygdala and then process those feelings around that, it stops firing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we give ourselves the opportunity then to really process the underlying cause to that reaction.
I was just going to say, when we're in that brainstem response, all we can do is react. We have no chance of responding. We have to deactivate that trauma response before we can actually find a response.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting. I know I'm going to refer back again to my experience with trauma. For me, the most pivotal defining moments where traumas occurred with me, I remember in vivid detail. However, there were so many other types of trauma that were in that situation at the same time. I didn't remember a lot of them. And it was talking to family and friends later when they remembered something that had been said, or they said, that time that this happened and you reacted like this, I never quite understood what that was. And having them say that to me, it would then trigger the memory of what I'd repressed essentially. And I want to come back to the fourth stage, if you like, or the last stage that you were talking about with that process. And again, stating that it's not a standalone. One of the most important things that I really took forward in my whole life was that need to nurture ourselves, particularly after we explore some of those memories. That is such an important part of the process.
Absolutely. It's like the balm. And we also learn that, through doing that is that we can provide our own sense of safety.
Yeah.
That we have the resources to provide the security and the safety, the nurture, the love, the care that we require. So, and I would even say, doing something for yourself after that, rather than having somebody do something for you, doing something somebody doing something for you in that nurturing sense is nice and lovely, but in the context of healing, you're healing yourself from childhood,
Yeah.
particularly if your trauma happened as a child, your adult self becomes your nurturing parent, if you like,
Yeah.
as an ego state almost. So your inner child starts to feel calm when it consistently sees that the adult state is going to listen, and the adult state's going to keep it safe, and the adult state is going to care for it. So absolutely critical to the process.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Something you were saying before made me think about what I call the onion skin effect of healing from trauma. And that is often we will heal some trauma from our past and think that's fantastic, but only to find that there's more. It's like peeling skins off an onion. Those first couple of skins, they're all papery and leathery and quite hard and thin to peel off, but then we cut through. They sort of do get easier to come off, but you get down into the core, and I've been healing now for, a decade and a half, we'll say, from my childhood trauma. Still, things not so much from my childhood, but I think the resourcing and the tools and the awareness that's brought about me. I've recently was in a situation where I was caring for my mum. I came back from California to look after my mum, brought up all the stuff about, the dysfunctional relationship. And I love my mum. She's a great person. She did the best that she can, and I really honor her for that. But our relationship was quite dysfunctional. And so now that I'm free of my childhood trauma, I've been going through all that, attachment style stuff and all that stuff. So, hey, it's never ending. Well, I wouldn't say it's never. Maybe it is never ending. I don't know. I'm not at the end of my journey, so I can't rightly comment. But it's an ongoing process, and diving into yourself in some ways, just looking for why am I like that? Why do I react when this happens? And just bringing conscious awareness and becoming conscious to why you would react and not respond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? It's a 3-letter word. It's a word that we use all the time. It is so powerful in these situations. Finding the why will help you to find that reason underlying the behavior. It'll help you to find the explanation for the emotions that you experience. It will help you to find what your purpose is at that current time. A lot of things in our past experience will affect the way that we live our lives from that point forward. And certainly if trauma is left there, unedited, untouched, it will continue to affect you until you can get that support.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I believe too that, I did a process a while through some conscious dance that I did. And it was when I was dealing with the stuff around my mum, and it was on Mother's Day. And I did this sort of dance journey, back into my mother's womb and then back into her mother's womb. And I was invited to imagine what I could feel, what it was like to be her, and then what it was like to be her in her mother's womb. And what spoke to me really profoundly was, wow, it's almost like I felt my mother's trauma.
Wow.
And when I stepped back into her mother's womb, it was like I felt her trauma. And, so often trauma is intergenerational. Mm-hmm. It's carried, there's this old saying, the sins of the father are visited for 7 generations or something like that. I don't know whether that's true or not, but often traumatized people, especially people with childhood trauma, and it's not resolved. And then when they have children, not always, but often, there's things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that makes sense when you take this in context, that trauma will affect the way you think and the way that you behave.
Absolutely.
And so that makes perfect sense that if your mother had gone through trauma, if her mother had gone through trauma, even if she hadn't, if they haven't addressed that, it is going to affect the way that they behave and interact with everybody, in particular their children. And my experience in becoming a mother, I often say to people, I had a very wonderful upbringing. I have a beautiful family. I'm always been very grateful for that. And yet I always say I never quite understood the level of love that was possible until I became a mother.
Yeah, beautiful.
So profound.
Yeah.
And I was so determined to not have that trauma that I'd suffered continue through to my son. Whether that's what's happened or not, I can't comment. But I'm curious at what point you found out or became aware of your mother's trauma.
Once I started on my healing journey, I knew, I guess, just by looking, like my mum, has been depressed all of her life, and a few different things. Had a bit of a dance with alcoholism there for a while. So there was clues which I didn't understand until I actually started to uncover and work with my trauma, and I asked her, and she said, "Oh yeah, this happened to me," but she was abandoned herself, quite abandoned. Witnessed a lot of domestic violence in her family home growing up. But she didn't really want to go there. Didn't want to talk about it, and I think that's a generational thing too.
Yeah, I agree there.
Yeah. One of the things you said before is the why. How do we get to the place that we ask the why?
Good question, isn't it?
Because it prompted me, and I was just thought about, critical things for me in my journey. And that is somewhere along the line, and I think it was after my marriage broke up, I had sat with a loaded crossbow underneath my chin, and the trigger, it didn't go off.
Right.
And put it aside, and I thought, I really need help here. And I went along to see a psychologist who said, "Have you ever tried meditating?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I've tried this, I've done Tai Chi and stuff like that." And but she put me onto this binaural meditation, listening to different frequencies through different ears. There's a million YouTube tracks and Insight Timer and that. They've all got great things.
Yes.
And I started to do this every day because I thought, I've hit rock bottom here. I've really got to change. This is a tool that I've been given. So, and, I've been doing some form of meditation ever since that point in my life. And I just, when you ask the question, when you ask yourself why, I just think, having a practice of mindfulness or meditation opens up the space for us to ask why, and then to notice. Then to have the ability to self-witness is such an incredible tool. We were talking about react and respond before.
Yeah.
Having that spaciousness to notice, so that we don't always just automatically react. We can start to respond.
Yeah.
I just had to throw that in because I'm very...
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
You're very passionate about about having a practice of mindfulness or meditation or doing something that separates you from your thinking mind or even your feeling. You know, we talked before how important it is to feel our feelings, but I think it's also important to know that we are more than our feelings.
Yes, we are. And it's interesting. I did a program called Grow many years ago when I was going through depression. And the one phrase, there were many, but the one phrase that has stuck with me from that point in time was feelings are not facts. And in context, we've just been speaking about emotions and honouring that, and that is true. However, if our feelings are the world is bad, everything is bad, I'm never going to deal with any of this. If we're talking about those sort of feelings and internal language, that doesn't have to be our fact. And not control us. And
I've recently done a breathwork journey, you know, like some breathwork every day over a period of a 2-week period. And it was quite intense. It was absolutely blissful. And what I realized that the gateway to my bliss was actually through my feelings. I breathed through so much sadness in my heart. You know, I've done a lot of work around shame, especially, you know, from my childhood and, you know, being very promiscuous and prostituting myself and all those sorts of things, you know. So I've done a lot of work in shame, but actually through this process, I discovered, you know, yet even more shame and more stuff. And, you know, at the end of the process, I was in an absolute state of bliss.
Wow.
And what I realized afterwards, that the gateway to that bliss was actually through a lot of those, you know, through my feelings. So it's not a matter of, you know, to get to that place where you're beyond your feelings. It's not through avoiding your feelings.
Yeah.
It's actually your feelings are a gateway to that. So, you know, my feeling that a lot of the feelings that I uncovered in that process was huge sadness, but feeling, noticing it, seeing and breathing through it and sticking with it and being present with my body and just doing this breath process just took me like through it into this euphoric state where, you know, the angels were holding me up. Yeah. It was sort of like, yeah, so it was absolutely amazing. But it was really quite a definitely, you know, I knew it, but I really felt it, that all of my feelings are gifts and gateways to a higher state of being, a healthier, more vibrant state of being for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful perspective to have when you have that awareness. And we've spoken a lot today about the psychosomatic connection. So there's that connection, another type of connection there. And certainly a lot of people, when they're feeling emotions, they will get bodily responses. They will get diarrhea. They will vomit. They will feel sick. They will start breathing very quickly or stop breathing and hold their breath. There are all these different responses that the body will go through.
Yeah.
And again, I'd like to highlight that breath work is a very physical state. And you're doing something physically to allow your body to also work through what your mind is remembering and what you're feeling. And the importance, again, of the connection of allowing your body, so essentially getting out of your head and getting into your body and into your heart, to allow your body to take over and process through those emotions. It's such an important thing, particularly when the trauma that has occurred is physical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that, like, I often say to people, you know, emotion, energy in motion. Yeah. And so if we stick our emotions in us and stuff them in and don't express them or call them bad or good or whatever, yeah, it's absolutely going to affect us in the body. You know, I see people come to, you know, Heal for Life, for instance, at the beginning of the week, and they're bent over and stooped. And by the time when they start to learn that they can release some of these feelings that they've been carrying around, by the end of the week, they're like different people. They carry themselves in a whole different way. The tone of their voice, so many physical things change, once these things start to clear. I often say to people that emotions are energy in motion. And if we don't let that energy express through our bodies, it gets stuck in us. And I know that it makes us sick. I've felt it myself, and I've cleared the emotion and I've cleared my body of the stuckness in there. It's incredibly powerful how much our emotional state impacts on our physical state.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I have 2 more questions before we finish up with this interview, which has been fantastic, and I appreciate and again honour your story and that you're able to talk about these things, and so many people will connect to what they're hearing. The first question I wanted to ask is one that, as a sexual assault victim myself, I understand, and this caused me an immense amount of confusion. And it is something that, as a child going through that experience, would, again, I think, be very, very confusing. And this is the issue of sexual arousal. So the fact that our sexual organs, a little bit like our subconscious thinking, don't know the difference. So when we are touched or something happens or stimulated and we have this sexual arousal that our body is feeling, that can be extremely traumatic after having been in that situation, when perhaps you are in a loving relationship with someone and you do want to engage with them on that level. Did you have that? I mean, do you think that that was part of what was underlying your behaviour in your adolescence with prostituting yourself, or do you think that that was something that perhaps came later that you may have had to work through to be able to have a healthy sexual relationship again?
It's a very deep question, and a lot of people, like when I was a child and I was being touched and, stimulated in various different ways, it felt good. It felt nice on my body. And I know, for myself and during adolescence, and my father of his generation, although we had, he had friends that were, in same-sex relationships, but he would, in his language and his jokes and the stuff that he would say, were quite homophobic almost. Right. It was just the way things were in that generation, and thank goodness it's not like that anymore. So there was a whole lot of shame because they were men and I was a boy, and, what did that mean about me? Not that it means anything about anyone, whatever their sexual preference is, of course. But so there was a lot of that was part of my journey through adolescence. What is my sexuality? I think it's a time anyway where we openly explore our sexuality, and it's good, natural and healthy too. But, having had my whole innocence stolen away from me, which is what childhood sex abuse does for one, you don't get the chance to experience and develop those things normally and naturally. So for me, my sexuality for many years, probably most of my life until recently, was a way that I felt worth and love. It was like a tool, like I could please people with it, which is not a healthy sexual way to be. I mean, it's not. The way that it was pathological, the way it was being expressed through me. I think really diving in and doing the work was the only way that I could ever have a proper, intimate, not just physically intimate, but truly intimate relationship where, that part of a relationship was enjoyable, but not central and didn't necessarily to represent my total worth.
Yeah.
That was quite a journey.
Yeah.
But so many people I've worked with over the years, have a lot of shame or guilt to a lesser degree about enjoying the sexual experience of being molested as children, remembering that it felt good. But it is, like you say, it is just a normal physical response that those things feel good.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I asked the question because I feel that a lot of people would want to know. The other of my two questions is something you have answered very early in the call, but I'm going to ask it again now. Without the adversity, and talking about all the different types of adversity and all of the work and emotions and path that you went through in trying to deal with that at various times in your life, would you be the person you are now had that not happened, and why?
It's hard to say. I think what happened to me sent me on a path of inquiry about myself to try and make sense of why I was like I was. And I think when also too, when we become extremely like our people antennas grow, having to deal with dangerous things, it grows our people antennas. So I think that, my whole journey has really been like even trying to make sense of my unconsciousness when I was, a very troubled adolescence, trying to understand, so that drive to want to understand why I was or responded like I did and like I still why I think has definitely shaped my journey. And I don't think that that level of inquiry or may have been there otherwise. I also think that the ability to sort of feel and empathize and to be able to know what people may need, like to be trauma informed.
Yeah, I like that term, trauma informed.
To be able to provide safe space or something. I don't think, unless a lot of people don't know what that can mean when they're talking to somebody.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely, enhanced those abilities. It's definitely driven my my path to self-inquiry and, meditation practices and doing all those things to, rise above or rise in my rise through my consciousness with consciousness as much as possible. I definitely attribute that. It's hard to say if that never happened to me, I don't know.
Yeah, it is definitely not a concrete thing that we're ever going to know, is it? And yet trauma informed, for me, that sort of says it all. That the fact that you are allows you to naturally, organically connect with other people's energy who have been in that space.
Yeah. I would definitely say that has definitely been a result of my childhood experience. Or one of my childhood experiences, I should say, because I had other ones too that weren't so upset, weren't so difficult.
Yeah, and this is it. Life is going to throw us lots of things throughout our journey here on Earth, and it's not like we'll never have adversity again. And again, we come back to that conversation of the different levels of adversity. There's always going to be something that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, Vera, too, you know, like that's another thing too, you know, knowing that I got through that,
Yeah.
you know, when adversity comes at me again, I absolutely feel resourced.
Yes.
To be able to process, go through, unravel, and know that there's always something more.
Yeah, that's right. Which gives you more hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And hope is such a powerful emotion.
Yes. It definitely is. And, there has been times in my life where I have felt hopeless, but not anymore.
You got through, and your adversity muscles are well practiced, and therefore, as you said, when the next bit of adversity comes along, you sort of know some processes to put in place to help deal with it.
Yeah.
What does the colour green mean to you? Like a grassy green, you know, that real yellow green?
It means life. It means life. Absolutely love. Green has always been my favourite colour. I have worked a lot with plants, and I love ecology and the connection between everything. And green is chlorophyll, so it's a primary energy in the terrestrial ecological system. It's, a foundation for the food web.
Yeah,
green
it creates our oxygen to breathe.
Yeah. So, green life.
I'm just seeing a lot of green in my head.
Yeah. So what does green mean to you?
To me, green means calm. And I put a lot of that down to grounding. However, when I think of the word grounding for me, I think of browns. Yeah, like the dirt grounding. So I would be less likely to go out and walk barefoot on grass. I'd be more likely to walk barefoot in the sand or in dirt to ground myself, or go and touch the bark of a tree. And so green for me is very much like blue. It's very calming. I mean, overwhelmingly calming. So if I want to really focus on settling myself down, I will always go to my greens and blues. Hence what you see behind is a combination of green and blue. It's very much in the teal colours there, and that is from my Dream series. And blue for me has, it's multifaceted. And so blue, again, is very calming for me. I have very striking blue eyes, and it's always been a point of interest to people who are very connected to energy. So many times through my life, when I meet people who are quite spiritual or very earthed, will look at my eyes and I'll say hello, and they're just like, oh, there's something about you. They're like, your eyes, are you I've been asked, am I a yogi? Am I this? Am I that? And my answer was always no. However, what I've experienced through my life is that I am very connected to energy. And in whatever form that takes, spiritual, metaphysical, I've always been very sensitive to that. And blue for me is a combination of calm. It's also can be very tumultuous like the ocean. And so when I relate that back to myself and people looking through my blue eyes into my soul, if you like, a lot of people do consider the eyes are the windows to our soul. That sort of fits. I've always had that calming personality and effect on people, always, all my life. I'll never forget my sister doing acupuncture, and she took me along one day, and she hated getting it, but it was helping. So she sort of put through herself through the fear. And this particular day, she wanted me to come and stay with her. And the gentleman doing the acupuncture work was an elderly Chinese man, and very, very connected again. And he commented to my sister, "Why aren't you more like your sister? She's got it. She's got it worked out. Feel that calmness. That's what you need." And at that point, I was quite young. I might have been 15 or 16. And I was like, "Oh, that's nice." He picked up on that. And my sister sort of she was like, "Yeah, I know." And I was a bit taken aback by that, because she wasn't really the sort of sister that would validate things like that very often.
Yeah.
I loved her. She's a beautiful person, but that just wasn't her style.
Yeah.
And yet later in my life, it almost seemed like my blue eyes were what got me in trouble. And, there were lots and lots of dreams of water and blue.
Yeah.
And in all different states. And whenever I was feeling anxious, that's when the big waves would come out. That's when the tsunami would happen. That's when the dreams of people drowning would happen. And so, there was always this association with blue and water and how fluid it is. And for me, that was really an extension of life and adversity and how things can change. And yet, with every storm, it will pass and become calm again.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah. I am definitely one of those people that would say, I think, the eyes speak a lot.
Yeah.
And yes, perhaps you have been a yogi.
Maybe.
Maybe. I definitely feel and sense an energy from you, and it is very soothing and it's lovely, and it's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. The pleasure has certainly been felt on my end as well. And as you're aware, I do pick up on these energies as well. And I'm loving the connection that we've had during this interview. And I thank you so much. I know that many of our listeners are, again, going to find so much value for them. Each of our listeners will take what they need from hearing these episodes and stories, even re-listening to certain episodes. They will pick up on different things at different times.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we are just all one big human organism, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I believe that life is just one field of love frequency.
Yeah.
And if in some way my experience makes it, provides a little hope for someone else, then I'm happy to offer it up.
Wonderful. How can people get in touch with you if they would like to work with you?
Okay, yeah, probably through my website, which is just www.inconnectioncoaching.com. I've got a little appointment calendar there. You can book a 15-minute call with me via Zoom. Happy to have a chat to see if I fit for you and if you fit for me.
Yep.
And we can take it from there. I am going to be offering up through my website again soon, breath work journeys. And they're not the traditional rebirthing breath work type of style of journey. I want to journey people, to their divinity with my breath work. Through my calendar, we'll have a Zoom call and take it from there.
Wonderful.
Facebook's always a good way to reach out. I have a Facebook page. It's just In Connection Coaching. Been lovely chatting with you. I love the backwards and forwards, and I love the space that you hold. Beautiful, safe, gentle, thoughtful. Well, I think that the inner child is a gateway to one of the gateways to a flow state. It's like painting, colouring in and drawing. You lose yourself. You lose a sense of yourself, of time, of everything when you're lost in that beautiful artistic creation. I absolutely adore that painting behind you. Really, it's quite hypnotic, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I should try and move so you can actually see the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty cool.
It's lovely. Yeah.
As I said, it's one of my dream series.
Yeah.
And it's reflected.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my work has reflection in it. It's a very important aspect of my journey very early on. If I was in a more conscious state of just being who I was and accepting who I was, I would never have married that man. However, I wasn't. And to get to the point where I could self-reflect on that and say, you know what, I accept my part in everything that happened. I accept that I did choose to marry this man. I had opportunities to pull out. I didn't for all these different reasons, and that's okay. And being able to reflect on your life, being able to reflect on your choices that have brought you to certain situations and not harbour the guilt and the shame and the anger and everything that might go along with it at a certain point in time, to be able to release that side of it and simply observe and be aware is an amazingly powerful space to be in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. It gives you the ability to respond to, rather than, be caught in the anger and regret and sadness of, oh, why didn't I do this and why did I? Like you can't change from that place. Yeah. There's no growth from that place.
Yes, that's right. And life is about growth.
Absolutely.
We continue to do it, don't we? Right through.
Yeah. It's actually like in a biological definition of a living thing.
Yeah.
Cells have to divide. It's got to grow.
Well, another story, more WhyMe moments and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.